When did a feeling of we need to get out of here immediately save you? I was about 11 or 12 years old at a neighbor's house. The sun had already set. It wasn't completely dark yet, but it was close and there was less light by the second. We were sitting on the lawn because we loved watching the sky turn from day to night, just talking and giggling and carrying on as little girls do. A truck drove up our street, slower than usual, but not suspiciously slow. Still, I felt my gut sink for some reason I didn't understand. A couple minutes later, it passed by again. And then again after another few minutes, though not quite as slow this time. I was 100% positive it was the same truck, so I watched it drive away and noticed it started slowing down. I told her to get up, and when the truck made another U-turn and started heading towards us again I told her to run and hide. I don't know if she realized what she was hiding from, but we ended up splitting in two directions. She dove behind a bush, and I crouched behind an old car parked in their driveway. We could see each other, and I had a clear shot to the door if I needed to dart in to get a parent, but we heard the truck roll up and stop in front of her house. Someone got out of the truck and started calling for us. I honestly don't remember what they were asking though. We just kept our eyes locked and tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. We probably should have screamed, but I think we were both too scared. The person eventually got in their car and took off. We stayed hidden for what felt like forever, eyes locked, until we finally felt safe enough to run inside. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't notice something and we booked it, or if that person was actually dangerous or not, but I'm glad that I'll never find out. I was riding my bike during a huge storm when I was 10. There was this huge, recently built brick/concrete wall right beside the sidewalk where I was using as a racetrack. I was having a good time and suddenly I felt that get the fuck out of here, which I did. The next morning as I passed by the place I was playing previously, the entire wall had collapsed. Not me, but my mother. She was on a business trip taking a taxi from the airport and she noticed the driver wasn't taking the route usually taken as she had done this multiple times before. She asked him first out of curiosity. Perhaps there was a road closure or something. The guy simply mumbled something and mostly ignored her. Then it more apparent they weren't headed toward the hotel and instead away from the center of the city. She got more and aggressive, eventually demanding he stop as he kept ignoring and mumbling something. Finally she got loud enough and threatening enough that he did pull over and she got out. She had a cell phone, but smartphones weren't a thing yet. She was able to call a taxi service and get someone else to pick her up, and sure enough they were headed nowhere near her hotel. Now maybe this guy was hoping he could take an ignorant tourist on a joyride and rack up some high fare, but it sure has the feeling of something far more malicious in the making. I was at a house party in high school and things were getting very rowdy. Tons of people just trashing the place, and I just had a bad feeling. Told my friends we should leave but none of them would listen. I remember going out to my car, and as soon as I got in the cops pulled up. I ducked down and waited for them to get up to the front door and just drove off without them even noticing. Several of my friends spent the night in jail or hiding in the woods that night. I slept in my comfortable bed. Lived in a rough place and have been robbed many times before. Usually a bunch of guys asking for spare change then threatening for your wallet. Anyways, I came out of a club at 2 AM or later and waiting for a bus in a deserted area with a friend. See a bunch of dodgy looking guys you could tell were up to no good. I instantly get the feeling, but rather than run and have them chase me, I walked straight to them with a bit of a crazed look and asked them for spare change. When they said no I insisted. They left us alone. I'm not a big or threatening guy by any means. This was one of my proudest moments more than 20 years ago. What just seemed like a bad storm had started. My ex then decided to play with the dog out in the backyard in the rain. I got a weird feeling about how strong the winds were, and despite being called crazy I told my ex she and the dog needed to go down into the basement for shelter with me. Within 15 minutes half my roof was gone. Apparently the storm was a derecho, which I'd not even heard of before that. I was getting a beer with a friend, and he brought along his friend. When we left I felt very drunk despite only having 2 drinks. They wanted me to come to their hotel as they were getting ready to go to a concert that night, but I made the excuse that I needed to get home because I think I left my oven on. My beer was 100% tampered with. My vision felt like I was in a tunnel. I got home in an Uber and immediately threw up and continued to do so for the rest of the night. I made a somewhat late night trip to a convenience store that I knew carried wine. I used to work really odd hours and sometimes late at night I'd finish my work and want to have a few drinks. As I was getting back in my truck, this young girl asked if I could give her a ride a few blocks back to her home. It was probably a bad idea to judge a book by its cover, but she was pretty young and dressed decently, didn't act too weird or anything, so I figured okay, well I'm heading back, and we get into a pretty rough part of town and she says, turn left up here. Very dark street. Whatever. I stop and she says she really appreciated the ride and wanted to do something for me. Asked if she could give me a BJ. I decline and start getting sketched out, like she needs to get out now. She gets out and closes the door, and as I drive away, two men dressed in dark clothing were just stepping towards the street and stared at me as I drove past. Pretty sure that would have ended with a gun in my face. That's what you get for being nice sometimes. I mean, it's all speculation, since we didn't actually end up getting kidnapped, but when I was 19 and traveling solo in Europe, I met this Australian girl in Spain who was also around 18, and we went to Italy together. We are both short petite girls and were very clearly in need of a place to stay. We missed our first ferry out of Barcelona, so we had to take the next one. When we arrived in Italy, our train was hours late, and we didn't get into Rome until around 1 to 2 am. We navigated the sketchy streets by the Termini train station and finally found our hostel. The check-in lobby was in a small dingy room that appeared to be a closet. The man working reception looked us up and down and told us there was no room for us there anymore since we were late, but suggested we stay in their sister hostel. Desperate, we agreed. He took us downstairs back to the alleyway where we were greeted by a large man in dirty clothing. They spoke to each other in a language other than English/Italian and led us outside. We walked down a couple alleyways until we got to an unmarked door on the side of a building. One of the men made a phone call, again speaking in a different language. We found it odd, since everyone could speak English, but they chose to speak in a language we didn't understand. A man cracked the door open just enough to poke his head outside, and upon seeing the other men fully opened the door and let us in. We walked down the stairs into the sunken room, which was lit by black lights. At this point it was me, my friend, and three large men. The reception was a dirty room containing a couch with some dirty sheets laid over it. They told us the rooms were in the basement and to follow them. We walked down a set of stairs, one man in front, followed by my friend, followed by another man behind her, followed by myself, and the last man behind me. We went down one flight of stairs to find that there was yet another flight of stairs going down to a closed door. At this point I lost it, and my friend and I pushed past the men and scrambled back upstairs. The men kept shouting at us that the rooms were downstairs, but the scenario seemed way too wild. We eventually found an Australian couple on the street who brought us to their expensive hotel where we booked a room. The next day we searched the internet for the sister hostel they brought us to. Can't remember the name they gave us. We found the hostel online, but it was very clear that this wasn't where they brought us. The hostel boasted beautiful views of the city, so clearly a few levels above ground, and was immaculate. We were definitely in some weird blacklit, dirty basement. We thought for sure that we were going to get kidnapped and sold into the sex trade that night. A friend and I had just seen a midnight movie. It was about 2:30 am when I pulled into a gas station to grab a yoo-hoo. I grabbed the bottle, turned around, and saw three men enter the store together. One waited by the doors, one stood near the register looking at chips, and the third was crouched down with his back to the employee door so the cashier wouldn't see him through the square window in the door. They all look at me at once and then try to ignore me, acting like they are just casually positioned around the cashier and door. I walk up, put my yoo-hoo on the counter. The cashier turns the scanner and basically tells me with his eyes, "You do it." I ring myself up drop money on the counter, and walk as normally as I could past the man by the door and out to my car at what seemed like the furthest pump from the store. I sit down, throw my yoo-hoo at my buddy, and hit the emergency button in my car that calls 911. I connect with dispatch and report a possible robbery. A mile or two later I see a cop car flying down the street in the direction we just came. I called non-emergency the next day to ask what happened, and they said the men fled after I left, and the cashier told the police he knew he was about to get robbed too, and to thank me for calling the police. That felt good. What didn't feel good was my buddy, in all his nervousness about what was unfolding as he was listening to me recount everything to dispatch, thought I just gave him a random yoo-hoo, and chugged that thing down like a starving infant with a bottle.